the security relationships and all that, is the EU still trying to head for an ANZUS type agreement?
Sorry, is EU?
Is the EU trying to head for an ANZUS type agreement?
I don't know. I mean, the answer is I don't know. For the moment, we have this regular dialogue, at least once a year. I would say, I would imagine that with the UN angle, it's likely to be more rather than less. I don't know. It's not on the book for the moment, but it is quite likely.
The answer is no. Australia will not agree to something like that.
Anyone wants something?
I don't think so. I mean, you can't. I mean, Australia and the US have a very different type of relationship. I think also it's kind of fixed, whereas the EU and Australia's strategic relationship is more practical ad hoc in a way. Even though we have a continuous dialogue, we have particular operations we're involved in, but that gives you flexibility. So pragmatism and flexibility. Australia never wanted to be a NATO member, and Alexander Downer actually said that himself, and he said we never will. That's open to debate, but that attitude shows as well that Australia has a very different conception of security and its own role and place in the world to, for example, NATO members. And not EU countries are NATO members as well. Most are, but not all are. So Australia likes to have pragmatism. We like to have flexibility, but we are very strongly committed to ANZUS alliance, and we also have a special security relationship with Britain as well. So with the current British politics, which are quite alarming when it comes to British-EU relationship, it's interesting to see how that is going to affect our security relationship.
Given that the EU would like to be viewed differently in Australia, given where we're getting our publicity from, I would put it that it would probably come back to you or your department, that needs to be changed. What are you doing to try and, I guess the best words, infiltrate the Australian media?
I mean, I give a tough answer. What we are trying to do is to bring more journalists to Europe, for example. So we fund all prizes, and we try to get Australian journalists to be more exposed, to have a chance to discuss, to get a sense of the reality firsthand. We try to have regular contact with the press, either through interviews, inviting them to seminars, discussions, etc. But of course, it's complicated.
And how do you think that's going?
I think it's some part of the press is more difficult to penetrate than others. But with others, those who are receptive, I think it is working relatively well. But it's still a massive work to be done.
The thing that strikes me is that the EU is very open and it is reaching out. The thing that has struck us, once you start to sort of scratch it, there are just so many ways in individual member states to make the paths easy. Some individual member states make it easier than others, but there's a genuine desire to have a conversation with Australia. Part of the problem with the media is a slightly perverse response, that the more Europe wants to talk to us, the more diffidence we show, the more we sort of retreat and go, we're talking with these people over here. And I think that's just weird psychology within the media. I think it is partly a sort of a cultural thing, and it's the sort of thing that Nina was talking about too. We construct ideas, perceptions based on what? We construct it based on stereotypes, on nostalgia, and this is where we get that sort of historical notion of Europe. It's not enough direct experience, and we're not building it on that direct experience. Now, you know, I think with Europe making it easier for students to travel between Australia and Europe, that's where it's got to come in, that's where it's got to change. I think it'll be a generational shift, as students just become more naturally mobile. It's certainly happening in Europe. The fact that there is a borderless Europe, the fact that you've got, Erasmus, which is the study program within Europe where students can just, it's very hard for Europe to retreat back to a bordered state because the students go, what the hell are you doing? The young people are so used to this idea that Europe is open. The problem is they take that for granted. So there needs to be a bit of a sense of risk. And I think, the current climate that Europe finds itself in might actually sort of give European Union the sort of ammunition to really argue its case for, for consolidation and for sort of really making it relevant in the minds of Europeans. Whether that's going to work for Australia, for our relationship, I'm not sure.
The media problem is part of the changing media landscape. But as you know, we're all struggling with whether or not newspapers are going to be viable. And at the ABC, we're just doing 24-hour news without any extra money. We're trying to put news on iPhone apps, and it's kind of like the digital landscape has just pulled the rug out from under our feet. And so part of the problem with covering stories of Europe, we're having trouble covering anything, except sport. And one of the astonishing and tragic things is that when we were in Brussels, the media centre there is fantastic, and there's no Australian journalists. We have, as the ABC, we have one Europe correspondent in London, or a couple in London. Okay, so you're expecting someone from London with the sort of British perspective to cover stories of Europe. And it's just awful really, because they're coming at European stories with that particular slant. And now other media outlets don't have any kind of foreign correspondence. They've all been pulled because they're so expensive. But we went on a tour of the facilities was it the Parliament?
No, it's in the European Commission.
The European Commission. And they've got, once you're a journalist there and you're based there, they almost hand feed you stories in terms of this is the press releases of the day, and they're giving you so much information. Every day there's a 2 o'clock press conference that's in 8 different languages. There's free studios there. They'll give you free phones, computers, lines out to file your story home. So if we had a correspondent in Brussels, it would cost us nothing. It would cost us not any more than it would cost us to have that person living in Australia. Only you'd be in Brussels and then the EU would pay for everything. And we still don't have one. We still have no one.
Just a quick addition as well. ABC and ANU had a recent program called Australia and Europe in Conversation. And this was the first time that many European EU ambassadors actually, and some EU candidate countries ambassadors spoke to the Australian public. And there was it's actually on the ABC website, so you can download or listen online to 9 different sets of conversations.
What was the title?
Australian European Conversation. And a journalist would ask them a series of questions, and they would reflect on their diplomatic experience. This was the first time ever at that level in Australia. So I think this actually helps also to improve, not really improve the image of the EU in Australia, but actually for Australian public and students and anyone really to understand more what's actually going on this front.
And there are always 2 or 3 foreign ambassadors.
Yeah.
And somebody from the ABC, I've been attending a few of these.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, they were broadcasted by the ABC Big Idea, but they're all downloadable, and they're all the EU ambassadors were.
Can I just point out, Andrea's being very modest. It was actually Andrea's initiative within the delegation, that whole program. So he's been too modest to mention that.
The 2 questions here, there's one here and one here. Yes.
Yeah, just really quickly. One thing I've enjoyed about this conference is the exposure to many different kinds of delivery styles. So yesterday, that blew my mind, that argument at the end. I really appreciated that. On the day 1 with the Russian guy, they're very charismatic. And with there was the student. What I'm really interested in is this is more from a teacher's perspective. The young lady who presented in using Prezi, like that was just mind-blowing, that presentation. Like Nina's then was with, you know, the very thematics, the humour and the thematics, but there's also a lot more into it. But mate, that presentation then, like that took me back there where I was. So that was awesome. And but the reason why I'm asking you is what software do you use? So I can do something similar. So
it's actually a really good question because I mean those images reflect my own feeling of being spellbound in Europe, and it's really interesting to sort of step out of your own professional sort of structure and just allow yourself to care about the subjects you're talking about. We're radio producers, we don't do TV. We try to do TV, we're really crap at doing it. We've got people on the floor below us, they do TV.
yeah,
But we're expected to do multimedia, we're expected to do web stuff, and there was, you know, for a time they were saying we want video, we want images, we want, you know, everything. We're not going to give you anything, but we won't give you the tools to do it, but we expect you to do it. So wherever we're going, we take stills camera. But when stills cameras became able to do broadcast quality video, that for me meant I didn't have to take much extra kit with me. You know, we travel, you know, if you're rushing around, you know, we're not TV people, we don't have sort of roadies with us, it's just us. So being able to pull out a camera that could take lots of shots, and then being able to sort of at times put it on a tripod, record an interview with somebody if it's the right interview, and just mix it up and come back with something that is really evocative. And I think the thing is, in amongst all the structure and all the detail and all of that, you have to care enough. You have to care about this as a subject. Well, I mean, this is just really cheap domestic software. The editing of that was Sony Vegas, really domestic stuff. But you know, you start with good images. You start with the sort of the eye that you're capturing that stuff that you want to sort of, you know, restore that when you come back home. I think that sort of informs what you capture. And so, in a sense, we've become naturally multimedia observers. You know, we're listening to people, and that takes priority for radio. But now I'm sort of always thinking in terms of how I embellish that for a web audience. So if you go to either of the two series that we've done, you know, one which was specifically on Germany, and one which was on Europe as a whole, there's sort of extra stuff in there that's meant to sort of give your brain something else to anchor to while you're hearing the stories. And I think the other thing too that's really important for us in the media, and we're very lucky working with Radio National. I'm glad I don't work in news and current affairs or media snorts. The idea is awful because it's so regimented. We're allowed to be storytellers. And in the end, you know, it doesn't matter how worthy the idea is, if you fail to communicate that well, you lose your audience and you've wasted your own time. So what we do is take ideas and we try to turn it into something that is really engages them as much as it engages us. Now, we do that in varying degrees of skill, but everything we do, we bring to that fundamental idea that we want to communicate the things we've got in there, in here. So, you know, I move around. I'm not a specialist on Europe. Lynn's not a specialist on Europe, but we talk to people who are, and we're very lucky that people open up to us and are generous with us. So, you know, we're not sort of clever in one sense, but we're clever in another way. We know how to talk to people and how to draw them out, and people do open up to us.
And what are the name of the programs? Can you just, what are the name of the two programs? The Art of Being Europe, and what was the one in Germany?
The other one was Who is Germany?
Who is Germany? Are they on the Radio National website?
Yeah.
On the...
I think there are links on
Yeah,
the...
there's links and some transcripts on the USB that everyone's got as well.
Oh,
yeah,
great,
Just
excellent.
point
And
you right
there are
direction.
feature pages that have them all, those programs in the series and the streamline and the German one. It's just really fast.
Thank you.
just one follow-up question which I haven't heard in the last 4 days. When the French president, the new French president came in I don't know, was it last year? I'm not too sure. There was this huge kerfuffle, or maybe I may have had the wrong sources, that there was a lot of pressure that he wanted to come back to nationalistic tendencies, and there was a lot of pressure with the EU, with Germany and stuff like that. I haven't heard anything since in the last 4 or 5 months. What actually happened to stop that?
He's busy with Mali.
Oh, busy with Mali.
Yes.
I think he was confronted with the realities of office and the realities of a European Union that can't just sort of, you know, France can't retreat. You can't do that sort of isolation thing. You know, you can posture from positions, but no, it's much more different once you get into that position.
I think François Hollande is a pro-European, except that I think he wanted to engage, especially Angela Merkel, into what sort of European project we want to pursue. He wanted to this rather tough austerity measure policy to be complemented by a growth and job creation strategy. So that's what he wanted to also the European Union to move towards Eurobonds. So it was that kind of push, but I would say not isolationist. That was not his perspective, and for the moment I think he's bringing a different say perspective, but France is very much pro-European.
Was he in fact important? Was he important to bomb underneath Europe? Was it an important part of the new debate?
I think so. I think it has helped rebalancing a little bit the way the European Union design is about. Yeah, I think it was.
And his love life, don't forget, that was a lot of last year's reporting as well. So he, like his predecessor, have had a very interesting spotlight in their love life. So that might mean that he needs to focus more on domestic problems.
One more question?
Not a question, a comment. I would just like, on a very personal level, I would like to thank you. Because for me, you created for the images and what you said, you created a European story for me. And I think that's why I've always been interested in other cultures, because it's a story that make me think about myself. I think it's, I think you can look at it, it's an evolution in humanity. I think you can start with looking at the world and trying to understand it from a scientific basis and history. That's sometimes for me like scientific as well, because you look at data, relationships. But I think it's what kind of is in ourselves that you kind of reflected in your story. You're telling a story, and what the images and what you said, that is for me Europe, and thank you for that. It really touched me.
Okay, this one.
I would just like to make a comment. It's like preaching to the converted teachers of European languages being here. I teach in a state government school. To give you a personal example, the Indonesian faculty were given a $25,000 grant through the Asia Foundation several months ago. They bought a dozen iPads, and the kids, of course, being technologically able, are very, very keen on that. The German faculty is not allowed to access those. The government education department has made very clear they want to introduce Asian languages into primary schools, and those kids then will then be able to take it from prep right through to year 12. How are the universities influencing the government and the education department into making it fair for all languages, not just Asian languages?
It will be the last comment for now anyway. I would like to thank all our speakers very, very warmly, also for speaking from the heart, Michael. So thank you very much, and for having such informative papers, PowerPoints, discussions, and I cannot even tell you enough how much I appreciated your time and the presentation that you did. now it's an exciting moment for the students. So they're going to